Yo, 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 welcome back to the Further Your Lifestyle podcast, conversations on lifestyle, passions, and hustles. And today, I am so excited to introduce you to Justin Nolan. Now, in this episode, we chat about a lot of things, and one thing I just want to quickly say is a bit about Justin and how much I really respect and treasure our relationship that has grown over the last couple of months. Now, I met Justin on Clubhouse. He reached out to me originally when I kicked off this podcast, and he was there with all the encouragement, all the support. Now, I didn't know who he was. I was like, okay, who is this guy? And he was more than happy to go out of his way to help me to understand what it's like doing a podcast, but also just to have a conversation. And we actually ended up, we run a Clubhouse session once a week on, it's Australia time is Wednesdays at 1 p.m. And for him in Canada, it's Tuesdays, I think at 10 p.m. in the evening. Now, on that, we talk about, chasing big dreams. And that's where we originally, kicked off our conversations, which is now a friendship. And it was so encouraging to be able to hear all the things that he's about and that he's been doing and pursuing and chasing over his, over his life, and as a kid and as an adult as well. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to you, mate. Really do appreciate you so much. So in this episode, it's all about learning. Justin comes from a background of teaching, of education, and he is a life coach, and he really does help a lot of young people that have been in sticky situations as they transition out of, maybe those big changes in life. So some of these are coming out of prison. Some of these are coming out of different life situations which don't happen to the norm. And he helps them transition back into the everyday and help them, find a career or find a passion and something that they can, put their hands and feet on and run for. So it's really exciting to be able to hear some of those stories in this episode. But at the same time, we also explore, the approaches to learning and how to dream big. And actually deliver on those big dreams, and what it's all about, doing life with intent and how to have a bigger impact. So it's a jam-packed episode. I could chat for hours, and I have for hours with Justin in the past, and it's very hard to be able to condense this. But what we talk about, I really enjoyed, and I've come away and I'm motivated and encouraged, and I'm always inspired by Justin. So not to beef him up so much, but he's a really good guy. He has his own podcast, so you can check that out as well. Of course, we chat about that in the episode too. So however you like to listen, whether it's with a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, if you're driving, however, get comfortable, get cozy. And we are on Spotify, we are on YouTube, we are also on Apple Podcasts. So wherever you like to listen to, you can listen to it there. YouTube, we do have the video experience, and you can have a look at our faces and any graphics that pop up on screen as well. Otherwise, let's just get straight into it. So let's do it. Welcome, Justin. It's so exciting to finally have you here. How you doing, mate?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm pretty excited. Always love chatting with you.
That's good, mate. And you really are a bundle of a lot of things and lots of joy. But you're a teacher, educator, life coach, and you have a huge passion to learn. And you're all the way from Canada, so you're quite the package. But let's hear about you in a nutshell, man. If you had to summarize yourself, let us have it.
Yeah, I think kind of out of left field a little bit for me, I like to say that I'm a creative. And that may seem weird to some people because I'm not necessarily a musician or an artist or an athlete or a teacher. I kind of like to be all of those things, the sort of like jack of all trades is a
Yeah.
master of none, but sometimes better that way, right? And so I kind of like to say that I like to be creative in all areas, and just to try and inspire and motivate people to pursue their passions in whatever area that might be, because it's going to be something specific to them.
100%. It's and look, you've summed that up quite well, because it is, we all want to be doing so many things, and I can relate to that, being someone of passion as well. I love seeing other people, tap into their passion and be successful. And it's hard because you want to do so many things, or you see something which has potential and you want to jump in on it and like be part of it or learn it or wish you could do that skill, and it can be quite overwhelming. And it's a combination of, well, you have to teach, you have to be educated, you have to learn, you have to discover, and all that jazz. So you've demonstrated with all the content that you are creating, but it's no easy process, right? Like it takes time.
Yeah, for sure. I think um, everything worthwhile takes a lot of time. And that can be one of the most difficult things, is just appreciating that patience, allowing ourselves, yourself, myself, to appreciate the moment, not worrying too much about the past or the future. And I hate using cliches too much, but I love the cliche of all cliches, that things are cliche for a reason,
Yeah.
right? And so just really appreciating that all we can have is the present moment, right? We don't own that past or future. And typically, bad things happen in the past or future, not in the present moment. So, for sure, it's
Yeah.
going to take time, but you don't notice the time passing when you really find those life hacks, sort of. You mentioned the idea of coaching. That would be a number one tip, would be start to find more and more ways to practice being in the present moment, and that way it doesn't feel like it's taking a long time. You just have that present moment.
Dude, we're already a couple of minutes in and already dropping the big bums, and that's a very good point, because I think we all get so overwhelmed with, yeah, as you said, the stuff in the past and the stuff of where we want to be. Yet we're not even focusing on the day, the things that we can be doing today, the things that we can be doing this week, and taking one step at a time, one day at a time, one week at a time, one month at a time. And we're thinking, we want to be, our 10-year goal now. But you have to break it down. And I can resonate with that very, very much, just in the last week, taking action on things today rather than offsetting and putting it out, or thinking, oh, no, 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 I need to do all these things, but really prioritizing. And I can appreciate that's easier said than done as well. But before we dive into even more of that, let's back it up a bit. So, have you always been, let's, you are a teacher at the moment. You help, young people transition into a life of purpose, and, finding what they want to pursue. But let's hear a bit about that, and yourself. Is that something you've always done, or, has it just been something in the last 5 years or 10 years, or, yeah, let's hear about.
Yeah, so in terms of traditional formal educational leadership, I suppose, um, I was an athlete, a student athlete playing football in university. And over the course of 4 years of an undergrad, you often, in the back of your mind, kind of wonder, well, what do I want to do? And when you're playing in a 4 year, 5 year sport, in your freshman year, you're seeing the seniors start to choose life pathways, right? And so then your second year, as a sophomore, you see another group of seniors choose their pathway in life.
Yeah.
And so over the years, we always had 5 or 6 people on our team that went to teachers college, and they were always people that I really looked up to. If they were listening to this right now, I'm sure it would be interesting for them to think back to those times when they were just 4 years older than me, but I was looking up to those types of people. And over the course of 4 years, all of a sudden, there's 20 plus people that I looked up to, and they all went to teachers college.
Mm.
So it was a natural addition to my education formally to decide, yeah, you know what, for my 5th year, A, I get to play more football, and B, I get to go do a 1 year degree to learn how to be an educator. So that's how I got into teaching, really. I was torn between doing that or going into sports psychology, and realized that sports psych goes into like a traditional academia field, right?
Yeah.
And I wasn't necessarily prepared to commit to, going into that, becoming a professor at a university type pathway, and having a whole bunch of more schooling. So I did the 1 year, and I would say I really fell in love with the idea of teaching. So much like any teacher in the majority of, countries where education is grade school and
Yeah.
high school, I went into being a traditional educator. It was phys ed, high school science, and senior phys ed for a while. And then about 10 years ago, I got into working specifically with very marginalized youth, which was actually what I studied during my time doing a master's program as well.
Hmm.
And I always really appreciated just trying to give some hope to the underdog, right?
Mm.
Support those who need it the most, those who struggle the most, those who feel like they just don't fit into society. And so that's where my educational day to day work has turned to. I started working in schools here in Ottawa. We have an education system that provides high school education to those who can't be in their school because of a mental health need.
Hmm.
That's the umbrella way for me to describe it. And what that looks like in pragmatic terms is we have a school for teen moms, we have a school for addictions, a live-in facility where it's
Yeah.
3 months, one for boys, one for girls. We have crisis units, mental health hospitals, and jails and things of that nature. So we provide the high school experience to those students.
Wow, that's that's a lot, and it's interesting because yeah, you've gone through the normal kind of style of pursuing something, going into the, whether it is trying to get into that 9 to 5, and you realize, well, that's not really where you wanted to go in terms of, the sports psychology, going to that and realizing that early is really good. Because I know a lot of people, we go into things because that's where we're being told or being driven or being inspired. And, you get into it and you think, oh, well, I'll just see it through. But really, it's not the thing that we want to be able, wanting to be able to do. And for you to be able to identify that early is really, really good. And then as you've transitioned, out from the sports and being a professional athlete and now into what you're doing today, it's kind of like you've come full circle of kind of where you were when you were trying to decide to do something. And now you get that pleasure to be able to help someone, potentially, obviously, maybe you weren't in the same circumstances, but being able to, put some wisdom and guidance into someone's life when they're trying to make that big change, whether it is, starting their career or starting a job or building a business or just transitioning from whatever state they are at this point. That's an awesome opportunity and experience. And I would assume it would also come with a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I get a lot is that kind of like a pat on the back sort of thing. People saying, "Oh, that's amazing work. Keep doing the work you're doing, etc., etc." Those types of things. People will tweet at me or send DMs all the time like that.
Yeah.
Um, for me, it's the space in the educational world where I belong, if any, because I really struggled with the mainstream education system in that I really didn't fit in either.
Yeah.
I just knew how to play the game enough to not get kicked out and to actually get good grades,
Yeah.
because even though you don't fit into the system doesn't mean you can't succeed grade wise.
That's true.
I was that person that would piss other students off because I would not go to class and barely study. But I already knew the system so well that I would go and get a 91 on the
You're one
first
of
year psych
those
exam.
ones.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
No.
But to that point, it shows how much of a rigid system it really is. And I figured it out young.
Yep.
There's only so many things they can ask me on the test, anyways. And
It's true.
it's somewhat binary when it comes to those subjects. And because that system functions like that, those who are the creative entrepreneurial type don't fit in because that's not how their brain works
Yeah.
necessarily. And so that's where I really struggled with wanting to be out taking photos or wanting to be with my friends listening to music or wanting to be in the gym working out or playing sports.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, no, we only have 90 minutes a day that you do that.
Yeah.
The rest of the time you need to do this, 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 and this. And it's these very segmented, silo based curriculum subjects in the majority of countries in the world, still very, very traditional, brought up in the through the industrial revolution and the
Yeah.
really the controlling of populations to serve the wealthy, right? And so
Yeah.
that's an interesting thing, and it's something that I could go on about forever, but for me that's a huge part of it. And so I feel like I'm not any superhero at all, but there is a documentary called Waiting for Superman, and it's all about waiting for someone to come help and rescue the educational system.
Yeah.
Now, that's certainly not me. However, I did feel that I could provide some support to those who struggle the most with the
Yeah.
system to say, look, there's other ways for you, and let's start chipping away and figuring it out here.
So it kind of boils down to maybe, be the change that you want to see in the world, and you're being part of that change of where you think things could be done better. and being able to apply that. And because whether you were in, the type of schools that you're working in now, if you were in a normal education system, well, you probably wouldn't like it because it would be against the ways of how you believe the learning should occur. Would that be more the case?
Yeah,
Yeah,
people
yeah,
ask me all the time, when am I going to go back to being a vice principal
yeah,
and pursue that traditional route? Now, it's hard to speak on these topics without sounding overly negative or
yeah,
pessimistic. Like, I am optimistic. I think if I had to choose one or the other, it's at least 51-49. Um, but for me, I know that it's a very hard system to change from the inside. And I've
yes,
learned this through many difficult experiences over the last 10 years, whereby I have tried a lot of things, policy development, instructional leadership, trying to build trust and then evolve the school system. But what I didn't realize was that the kids that really, really need it aren't welcome.
yeah,
And that's a sad reality. Um, and it's easy to say, well, of course they're not welcome. They're in jail or they're
yeah,
homeless. But um, that's because of these things that happen so young that
yeah,
just really ruin their educational experience. And so I've seen a lot of things, and I hate to be the Debbie Downer when it comes to it, but I've realized that one of the best ways I can help is to try and do things more externally from the outside, using things like social media, for example, to just continue to affect that same change, because
yeah.
people can, that's just in the world, right? It's not in the boxes and the institutions that we created necessarily within the school system.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a very important thing, and I was chatting to someone about this previously as well. I could dive into this quite a lot, and it's interesting because even if you are putting in a lot of that work and trying to change it, it's not going to happen overnight either, right? As you said, you have to go through the process of I guess, re-educating the education system of being able to adapt to those approaches. And I guess now what you are doing, it gives you that chance to be able to do that and help those that have missed out on the chance of even being, through the education system or to learn, which kind of then brings you to, around the life coaching, the educating, and helping them plan their futures. And I want to dive into, you know when it is coaching or when it is helping someone to see their potential or helping them through that transition process, what does that even look like from their shoes and for yourself? I mean, I know you would probably have gone through, you'd have hundreds of stories and, good and bad stories, but what does that kind of look like? Can we understand what that feels like or looks like?
Well, I think one of the most important and seems to be understood, yet it's misunderstood things, is the idea of self-care
Yeah,
and establishing that real foundation for one's self. And you start getting into things like empathy for yourself, compassion, self
yeah,
love, building self confidence, self concept, self esteem, all these somewhat synonyms for the idea of taking care of yourself,
hmm,
spiritually, physically, and mentally. And I think that that is so important and still underrated, that that's where you always have to start, is
yep,
helping somebody truly believe that without that self-care, then you
yep,
can't continue to build on top of that. What I like to do is show people a pyramid, and it starts with that self-care at the bottom, and then on top of that you add friends and family, because I
okay,
think that's a very important part of your foundation still. And so helping people build habits that are really revolving around that idea of self-care, believing in one's self, and appreciating that it is important. You deserve to have whatever success you would like to achieve, and then helping them build systems and habits to appreciate the positive relationships in their lives. And I'll give you a quick example of youth that I work with specifically in prison. They use a program to help youth not reoffend, which is very much like a traditional school workbook. And it's fill in the blanks in nature. And one of the things it says is, what's one of the most important things that you need to remember when you get back into the community?
Right.
And almost every single one of the students, and we're talking males between 14 and 19, they'll answer, I need to not get angry.
Okay.
And I'll often stop them and say, see, this is one of the problems as to why you are here in the first place, because this misunderstanding about our emotions, right? And how important things like anger and sadness are when it comes to being part of our psyche, and not trying to push them away, rather embracing them and deciding, how are you going to deal with anger? How are
Mm.
you going to deal with sadness? Is a very important part of that foundation. And there are a whole bunch of different exercises and just really talking points, conversations, just being willing to listen to people that will help them continue to understand and sort of solidify that belief that every emotion is valuable. I just need to decide, when I'm angry, am I going to go for a long distance run? Am I going to hit the punching bag? Am I going to write some poetry? What am I going to do with that anger? As opposed to, I need to not get angry.
Yeah, and I mean, that's really good approach, because you're right. We can't just say, well, you can't be angry. We're going to be angry regardless. It's like, how do you then work with that, and what action do you take, and what is the outcome or consequence of that? But I would probably expect that they would probably come back and say, well, that's easier said than done. And I can imagine that that's obviously the big process that you go through to work on those well, different emotions, and anger in this case. And do you find that it's, yeah, I say that it's easier said than done, but it kind of comes back to, like, before we can, love someone else, or before we can create something else or put energy into something else, we need to love ourselves first. And do you find that's really the approach you're trying to take? Like, because if they're in that solid mental state where, they've gotten rid of those issues, or they know how to handle those things that might be triggers, or things that might be just things that they didn't even realize, that's when they're able to start to make that next step progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have so many different examples, from sort of what might be considered mild to like very extreme if we were ranking them in terms of like a hot sauce. But I think that's an important point to kind of on the side mention, is that people's traumas and past stressors are completely their own experiences.
Yeah.
And I've had students who have been kidnapped, who have been, I'll use sexually assaulted to use a mild term,
Yep.
human trafficked,
Wow.
and
Wow.
they can they can just sit with me on a park bench and tell their whole life story like it's nothing, and then you know um, go about their day, and it
Yeah.
doesn't really stress them out. I've had others who have experiences that you wouldn't consider to be all that unique. Maybe they had a parent who just never believed in them, and
Yep.
yet that sort of trigger can be debilitating, right? And
Yeah.
so I think it's important that everyone's experience and how they've integrated their life struggles is their own
Yeah.
thing, and we shouldn't judge, just because one person can handle something and somebody else can't. Um, and the other thing to mention, I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that kind of on the side, because as you start talking about specific experiences, everybody's life is different.
Yeah.
But one such example for me, back to the question about taking care of yourself first, is I often have had students where they want payback, right? That's a big part of why they're in a custody
Mm.
situation. And when they go back into the community, because it's related to gang things,
Yep.
maybe they had a friend who was killed by by another gang, and they want retribution, they want payback. This is sort of a common thing.
Oh.
And one thing that I'll say is, I just try and help them appreciate that going and getting that payback, as much as it serves a part of their belief system, is not even being selfish. They'd be more selfish by just figuring out their life, right?
Yep.
And I've seen some really good interviews from hip hop artists recently, like Meek Mill and Nas, where they speak about this exact concept. You really want to get payback on this universe and this world? go create the life that you want for you and your family.
Yeah.
And so it's really just, as you put it, going back to that self-care piece and being like, yes, I understand, I hear you, I appreciate why you want this payback or insert need
Yeah.
here, right? But I know that it's not going to serve you in the long run. So
Yeah.
let's get more selfish and figure out what your goals are. And this goes into the kind of pyramid that I had mentioned a little bit earlier, the top parts of it. So I already mentioned self care, friends, and family. And at the top, I like to put two things sort of on an equal playing field as opposed to on top of each
Right.
other. And one is job and one is passion. Now,
Hmm.
sometimes, if we're lucky, fortunate maybe is a better word, these two things
Align.
are the same,
Yeah.
right? And so we can have our passion and our work be the same thing. You know, you think of successful musicians, that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
But moreover, and more often than not, they are either two very separate things, or you're just starting to build a life where percentages of them are the same. And so, what I like to do for people is draw two bar graphs. And if you are the type who's maybe mid-career side
Hmm.
hustling, but not even that necessarily. I was speaking with an 18-year-old the other day. He's only able to go into construction right now,
Yep.
but he wants to succeed as a hip hop artist. Doesn't have
Okay.
any money to pay
Yep.
bills.
Yep. So
So he needs
complete
some way to
different.
pay
Yeah.
for his apartment. Yeah, he needs some way to pay for his apartment, though, needs to pay for groceries, needs to pay for transportation, these kinds of things. And so I drew him this bar graph and I said, right now, you are 100% construction in terms of revenue, right?
Yep.
0% hip hop. But over time, if you stick with it, almost every couple months, we're going to be able to ratchet up this hip hop one,
Yep.
and the construction one, we'll get it to the 50-50 point maybe and continue to build a life towards that. But the most important thing, and this goes back to self care, is that you're choosing that legitimate passion that if that doesn't happen, if those bar graphs don't make that transition, you loved creating the entire time
Mm.
anyways. So it's really a win win situation for you.
Yeah. That's deep, and the reason why I say that is because coming back to what we even touched on before this, going back to traditional education, is I'm just picturing, imagine if this level of detail or support, or even the question of like, well, what's your passion, and what's a job you're interested in, and that was put on the table. Because I remember going through high school, and you get like a career advisor or coach or whatever, and they say, you need to pick 5 universities to apply for and 5 courses, and what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, I'm good at IT, I like business, and I've been doing science. So say, okay, well, here's some good ones that will probably align to what what you're interested in. It's kind of like, well, that's the one I want to get to. And they're like, yeah, yeah, but you need to put the other 3 or 4 in case you can't get that. And then you realize that these 3 and 4 are like things that you never even thought about doing. And you're like, oh, well, that's not really what intrigues me, but that's what you get positioned into. Whereas if we actually sat down with someone, had a conversation and said, what are you passionate about? Or what's a job that you would love to really get into? And see if those two mirror or match, or maybe they don't, like you've just said, where people and society and the world would be, it would be very intriguing.
Absolutely. And an interesting thing that happens, certainly in North America, anyways, and many parts of the world, is this idea of sports being the exception, right? Especially, I mean, the United States is the leader of that, right? You have
Yeah.
many athletes going and being super successful in the big sports like basketball and football,
Yeah.
where they wouldn't be there if it wasn't for sports. And I even really probably fell into that category. I don't know that I would have gone to university if it weren't for all the recruiting trips and all the money being thrown at the sports situation and really pursuing that as my main passion. Interestingly enough, to what we're talking about,
Yeah.
choosing a contact sport like football as the main passion to sink 50 hours a week into is a very difficult thing, because when it's done, it's done. And that's something that I think back to the question about coaching and all of these ideas about how to help people with self care is, again, choosing something that can happen and continue to develop over a long time. And again, this goes a bit full circle because we talked about the idea of patience.
Yeah.
And when you actually love it and you get in the moment with it, then all of a sudden years will go by and you're always continuing to take steps towards that goal. I think
Yeah.
the hard thing about something like high school, for example, is it is over fairly quickly. I mean, even if you focused on whatever that passion is for 4 years straight, are you going to be successful yet? Well,
Yeah.
probably not. You're probably graduating and still continuing to work on that. So I think that's part of the thing. The other thing is, again, just the rigidity of the system makes it very
Mm.
hard, whether it's the school day itself, who's supervising you, and what are you doing all day, and then also grades, um,
Yeah.
credits like graduation versus not graduating, and all these kinds of things. Um, as you referenced earlier, that it takes a long time for change. I just think specifically for this, like, let's call them the 10%,
Yep.
20% that don't fit in. I don't know that within that actual system it ever could really change
Yeah.
because for them, you're best off just being like, okay, create music all day,
Yeah.
have at her.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a very interesting point, and I know we could dive into this so much because there was an interesting video that Elon Musk, released about his idea of how to change the education and how he would do it, and I know that's a trending topic as well, and it's interesting to hear it, and especially now that we're in this, well, it's not really a new world, but everything that we have now, if you look back 20 years ago, even when I was doing high school, we weren't using iPads. Everything had to be written. Whereas now most people are using iPads, laptops to do majority of their work, or it's online and you can do it online. And the world is evolving in that sense. And now how we're able to learn, kids can go onto YouTube and just learn something themselves, right? And they can come and get that unfair advantage. But it's not really unfair because they've just done the research or they've learned a different way. And then you still have that physical way of learning as well of, we sometimes that can be a disadvantage for those in the traditional way. But when it comes to those physical types of work, whether it's, construction or whatever, they're going to fly through it because that's the way their brain is wired. So it's very interesting because we are in a different transition point of just the way people are and the opportunity we have, in front of us all the time. But the one thing I wanted to clarify with you is, so, yes, you're helping people, see their potential, understanding their own empathy and emotions and dealing with that. And then, actually helping them transition into something of, a dream or a goal. So it's, I guess there's the cliche of like, well, that's easy to say it to someone else. But how about you? Like, how are you, going in there, telling them all these things and ensuring that you're you're keep, walking the talk as well? Because I think that would be a big challenge as well. And it's probably something they're probably saying, oh, well, what do you know? Or, why should they listen to you? But is there something that you're doing to ensure that you are keeping towards your goal or whatever?
Yeah, I love that question because I have developed an answer over many years of trying to figure this stuff out. And had you asked me, 8 years ago, maybe you would have been in part helping me discover this answer
Okay.
because I really used to be exactly that, right? Say the right things and mention things like a couple of the books that I probably have behind me,
Oh,
like
yep.
Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck and Brene Brown, talking about the concepts of vulnerability and Bob Goff's Dream Big and all these references. I could go on. I would say these things and essentially quote them and put them into lessons for students. Stop Stealing Dreams by Seth Godin is another one.
Yep.
I would package these things and try and teach them. But one thing that I really, really realized was I think that somebody needs to model it. And so my life has become that same bar graph, right? I continue to go to work. I do a 9 to 5 that I absolutely love. And in fact, to the point where I don't have fear of failure at all, which is probably more common. I have a fear of success in the sense of all of us are asking this question of like, are we pursuing the right ambitions? And
Yep.
so for me personally, I always wonder, like, if I am truly successful in that other bar graph of where I'm headed creatively and entrepreneurially, that I'm not going to have time to go in day to day to that 9 to 5,
Mm.
right? I'll be doing a lot more things like this, being on podcasts and just creating for the sake of creating.
Yep.
But it's been difficult because, as you put it, walking the walk means starting to figure everything out from square one. And so when it comes to podcasting, building a brand on social media, developing a website, creating a YouTube channel, I've slowly done these things when I've had opportunities to, mostly
Yep.
late at night or in pockets of time, or all these time management tips I would give other people, right? To continue to build that so that
Yeah.
A, when I go to speak to a school in 5, 10 years from now, they're like, oh, yeah, I know what that is. Or if they don't, they can do a quick Google or a
Yep.
quick search of the handle and be like, oh, just tries. Okay. Yeah. Oh, cool. Oh, yeah. I think I've seen one of his videos or something like that. So the brand is already there a little
Yep.
bit. But if not, I can at least tell the story about how I've been putting in the work
Yep.
daily, weekly, monthly over the course of a few years to continue to build this. And as you put it, be able to, um, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk a bit.
Yeah, because it is that's the big challenge. It's always easier to see someone else's stuff and say, "Oh, you should do this or fix that," or "It'd be better if you did that." And it's like, well, hang on, you've never done this in your life, and you're telling me how to do my life or to run my business or to create my content. And I mean, I know personally myself, I can take that as I get defensive with that because I'm thinking, hang on, who are you to come in and all of a sudden just know everything? But then again, I also have to be open minded to that fresh perspective because we get stuck in our own box head and think, I know we've got four walls and we can't see outside of it. So I can appreciate it does work in both ways. You don't have all the answers and you're still figuring out your stuff, but you're there to be able to guide and give them the understanding. And I would probably be able to take the bet and say, with you teaching these kids or helping them, you've probably learned a lot for yourself, or you've probably ended up talking to yourself, realizing you're saying something, you're like, oh, actually, I should be doing this myself, right? They don't need to know that. But would that be true?
Yeah, certainly a few years back,
Mm,
absolutely, big time. Thinking back to when I was specifically day to day spending the majority of my time working with teen moms, right? And we
yeah.
had 50 girls there and all their babies there every day as well. It's a really neat school. And a lot of them were really talented photographers, artists, like visual artists, traditionally
Right.
painting, clothing designers, one who had a great idea for a podcast, and then another one for a YouTube channel.
Okay.
And so all creative entrepreneurial things. At that point, I didn't have a microphone. I
Hmm.
didn't have a MacBook. I didn't have social media for that matter.
Okay.
And exactly, I would tell them, well, this is what you do, right? Like this is what I would do if I were you. So there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
And then exactly as you said that, I can remember driving home, doing the commute stuck in traffic. Oh, it's a good day. Being like, what the hell? What am I doing? I'm not actually putting my money where my mouth is in terms of like, I'm telling them to do this. And for
Yeah.
this reason, they're not doing it. Why aren't they doing it? And over the course of that couple years, I realized that maybe if I start doing it, I'd be able to have a lot more empathy for what they're actually
Yeah.
going through. And so that's when I started getting very active on social media and building this brand as opposed to just telling people about it so that I intrinsically understand when people have questions or when I'm going to do a talk or when I'm on a podcast. I'm not just making anything up. I think that's one of the most refreshing things is I don't have to make anything up when it comes to all of this stuff. And the other thing is that for me, it's important to um, realize what my actual ambition is. And so I
Yeah.
often have to do a check in with myself because thinking of like, oh, I should do this, it's easy to start looking at the shiny objects, right? The
Yep.
shiny object syndrome. And so right now, I'm working with a lot of hip hop artists specifically. And originally my content was going to be okay, how can I model learning?
Yep.
I'm going to go out and I'm going to find somebody who does something cool and I'm going to shoot a mini documentary and I'm going to learn from them. We can do a podcast episode or a YouTube video, but I'm going to learn whatever
Yep.
their craft is. So that could be the person who bottles kombucha, it can be the fitness expert or the spray paint artist. And then what I realized was that by doing those learns, it was fun. However, it didn't have any longitudinal growth mindset
Right.
aspect to it, which to me is the most important thing to model for people. Like, look, I can't sing, but
Yep.
I'm going to start. I'm going to try. I'm going to get coaching, and you're going to see me develop from now until like 100 days from now, and you're
Yep.
going to see me singing pretty well. And if you're someone who's been pursuing singing for 10 years, you sure as shit better get singing, because if I pass you in, 8 weeks or
Yeah.
something, it shows that there's something else getting in your way,
Yep.
probably an unwillingness to be vulnerable, a misunderstanding about an effective learning framework, and these sorts of things. So since I've decided to create that sort of content, it's been fun because I think, well, what am I going to do next? And um, one of those things will definitely be in the world of hip hop, and it's going to be so fun, but I'll just focus on it for that
Yep.
period of time. But where I start to get lost, to bring this back to the point, is I'm like, someone like Russ here in North America, like really put in the work for like 12 years
Yep.
and then succeeded. It's like, well, what the hell am I doing? Who am I to
Mm.
think that I can go, create a couple hip hop albums and have it be interesting? But I'm like, well, wait, that isn't actually the goal to succeed as a hip hop artist.
Yep.
The goal is to always stay uncomfortable and to always stay in a beginner mindset,
Yep.
right? So just once I start to figure things out in something like singing or hip hop, then I'm on to the next thing. And
Yep.
that's okay, because my actual ambition is the podcast.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the Learn podcast, and that's really what you're all about. Is learning, and I've been waiting for you to say what you just said, and you've kind of summarized what I was going to ask. Is what's the intention there, and your side gig and goal, and it is very interesting because when you think about that, it really just boils down to taking action, which I know can be cliche, and it's just something that you say, but it is because I know that I've been playing drums since I was 6. Right now, if someone said, "Am I professional?" Hell no. Like, no. Like, I used to play at church and, play with some friends and stuff. But, I think of someone and I would see they've been playing for 2 years and they're like a rock star. I'm thinking, how the heck are they doing this? And that's because the dedication, the time commitment, the prioritization, the action that they've done. Now, I've been playing and I've just been playing here and there and getting things done. But once you weigh up the time, it's like time on feet, you can see, well, clearly that was their priority. That mine is just something I'm doing on the side. And it's interesting because in anything that we want, it comes down to getting uncomfortable or being vulnerable. And, it's like reaching out to starting this podcast. I could either schedule to have a meeting with you in a week's time to do it, or if you're free today, we could do it today, kind of thing. Right. And taking that action when it's available. Oh, but I'm not comfortable to do it today. It's like, well, who cares? It's available. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. And all of a sudden you've skipped a week's worth of waiting time and you're already a week ahead. Um, so when you put to that perspective, it is mind blowing, and I'm realizing this with little things. But when you play it back to that perspective, I mean, we are our own worst enemies when it comes to this, right? It really does come down to, well, what do you want? Are you willing to get uncomfortable to get to that goal? And let's do it and just go out and do it. So it's interesting though, because what I really wanted to make sure I tap into you and ask you, because I know you've asked the question before on on Clubhouse and other areas, but with that whole learning thing, and I think you've kind of answered it with what you've just said, is the whole debate and curiosity around, well, you've answered your idea of learning, so then the debate of 10,000 hours, in this case it probably might not even apply.
Yeah. When it comes to myself doing things for 10,000 hours, it'd be impossible to do all those things, right?
Exactly,
And
exactly.
it's interesting that you bring that up, because there's a couple things that I'd like to mention. One is that originally I kind of had this thought in my head of, I'm going to test how good I am at learning,
Yep.
because I don't like to be overly confident at anything in this world. I think one of the most important things is that we maintain like an appropriate, balance of confidence. But when it comes to learning effectively, I do know that I am above average at that, because I just have all these little tricks. and I know
Yeah.
how to go learn effectively. So what I'm super interested in is how fast can I learn things.
Yep.
Originally, I thought I want to teach kids how to podcast. I want to teach kids how to start a blog. I want to teach kids how to make an actual career out of music because nobody else is doing a really good job of actually
Right.
helping them succeed, right? You might have an amazing 11th grade music teacher, but once you leave her class, it's over, and it's done. Who's actually helping people turn their lives into this stuff,
Yeah.
right? And so what I learned though was that it would be impossible for me to do all of those things.
Yep.
So enter the podcast where I'm able to bring experts and connect them on these sort of like time saving things, right? A framework for succeeding in the worlds that they are an expert in. So
Yep.
that's one thing that was a huge development for me. Now, to talk about the 10,000 hours thing specifically, Malcolm Gladwell himself says that one of the things he never took into account was efficiency of learning.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the biggest points that's missed in all of that work is 10,000 hours is a long time.
100%.
Um, but how much into the 0.001% are you trying to become, right?
True.
Here in Canada, Drake just won the Artist of the Decade award in the last couple of days. Yeah, okay, 10,000 hours for sure. In that world, super niche specific. For me, that will be the podcast,
Yep.
right? That's where the 10,000 hours will
Yep.
come because I'm just going to do it for the next until God willing, however long I
Yep.
live, really, why not? Um, and reminding myself that those other things won't be 10,000 hours. It will be a matter of in a couple hundred hours, how good can you
Yeah.
get? And I'd be willing to bet you're not going to crack the top 1%.
Yeah.
But in a lot of things, if you have a really solid learning framework, then you can definitely get into that top
Yeah.
25%.
I guess the way you could weigh it up, and even this could be still looked be debated, is whether you become the expert versus being successful, right? But then I guess it comes down to what's defined as successful, because you're right. Like when it comes to playing the drums, you could probably spend 1 month, and you could start hitting out an epic beat on the drums, right? Whereas if you spent 10,000 hours, of course you'll probably then be able to say, I can start a masterclass and teach people how to do the drums, right? But it doesn't mean that you're not successful within 1 month in of I can now play the drums. So there is that caveat, but it is a very interesting thing, and it kind of plays back to what I mentioned at the start is the ability for us to be able to consume and learn at our own ease. We can go look up how do I play the drums and learn off the internet, whereas you think 10, 20 years ago, the only way to learn it is you have to go to the teacher or get a class down the street. You didn't have that access to be able to online. So that also changes the way that 10,000 hour perspective comes into play, because that efficiency, you can self-teach, right? So I think it's a very interesting, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but I was very curious to hear your take on it. And I really do enjoy when you always do talk about this, because I know you're quite passionate about it.
Well, there's that, and the transferable skills that you develop compound, right?
Well, that's true. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so to give an example of that is like, let's say that you choose something like hip hop at first. Um, Part of what you're going to be learning is marketing, right? So as opposed to like building an album for the next 10 months, I'm probably going to say put out a song a week.
Yeah.
Right. See, this is funny because I haven't even taken this on yet, short of like learning a little bit through
Yeah.
osmosis with the youth I work with and some hip hop artists who are successful. But like I haven't done any deep dive.
Yeah.
However, I would be saying, put out like a song a week, build some hype
Yeah.
around it, right? And put out a different piece of artwork every time you put out that record.
Yeah.
And over time you'll build that brand and you'll build this sort of following. Now what's interesting is you go to do digital art, build nfts or
Hmm.
painting
Hmm.
after that, and you have that audience and you have that understanding of how to create digital art. All of a sudden there are so many transferable skills there
Yeah.
that are just by happenstance happening after the hip hop pursuit, but you now are able to use those as well. And so you never really fully know where those transferable
Yeah.
skills came in. But
Yeah.
You get better and better at building opportunities. And I think, again, it just goes back to, as I've referenced, having a learning framework, right?
Yeah.
Which there are so many you could pull from, but things that I would recommend people doing are, for one, forgetting, right? Like, that's underrated. So
Yep.
we've all learned a lot of things. We have so much clutter in our head. So building a second brain so that if you were diving deep into the drums for 2 months, you're trying to have basically nothing else in your
Yep.
mind as much as
Yeah.
possible. Being active, like, you could watch his YouTube videos on drumming for 2 months,
Yep.
but you want to watch a video and then drum. Like,
Yeah.
you want to have
Execute.
your
Yeah.
action, yeah, upwards of like 80% of your time. Breaking things down into pillars is what I love to do. So to be a successful drummer, what are the different things that you need to do? And let's start improving a couple
Yeah.
percentage points a day at each of those. And I think the top two underrated things would be putting yourself out there, being vulnerable, right? Like,
Yep.
because you can get rapid feedback. If you're posting your drumming videos and asking drummers for feedback, all of a sudden you might get some crazy cool drumming teachers sending you DMs or just being like, yeah, keep going, but I would do this with your hand or
Yeah.
something. Um,
Well, that's
and
true.
then
Yeah. Yeah.
teaching is probably the most underrated one, because when people start learning something, we'll stick with the drum example. um, they probably don't feel like they could teach it all. However, if you are teaching back what you're learning, much like what you're doing with the running stuff, right? You're
Yeah.
already educating people as you're pursuing that. And with your flipping stuff, you're already
Yeah.
educating people. So teaching is so important for solidifying what we're learning, but
Mm.
also really to keep us motivated. And so that's another thing that I would say is really important to have there.
It's funny because when when you break it down like that, it actually sounds really simple. But the only reason it's not is because of the emotional side of being vulnerable, really. Because when you play it like that, if you put, A plus B equals C and you do that, you're right. Because someone that goes out and starts posting their videos of them drumming online, they have to be vulnerable. But they're not just having one teacher look at them. They've got eyeballs of hundreds of people on a daily basis, potentially going to be able to say, hey, do this thing, do that, do this, and you're learning 10 different things within a matter of hours or days, when usually you're only having 20 minutes with a teacher and you're going to learn one thing. So you're maximizing that efficiency, which is it's mind-blowing. And one thing I wanted to kind of then step up from this is, I guess from that perspective, you could really scale this on the sense of like, well, chasing dreams or having that bigger goal, because it's, once again, you can apply that same approach at that bigger whatever it is, and take the same approach within reason. And obviously there'd be some pivoting and adjustments, but do you think that would then apply if you're chasing a dream by following that similar approach? It's that's what's going to get you there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
One of the things I love, the content that I'm headed towards creating, and this whole brand of just trying things and learning and showing people that it's okay, because I need to model that vulnerability. But I do get a little jealous sometimes of someone who gets that clarity for themselves and says, yeah, I want to be an actor. Because to me, if you have the one thing figured out, then absolutely
Yeah, it
that
saves
big
you
dream
time.
becomes, yeah, and it becomes exactly that, figuring out that learning framework, breaking it down, and continuing to pursue that. And so acting is a perfect example, right? You can create a self tape or just start making random commercials or getting together with other
It's
actors
true.
and shooting and build a very quick script and give yourself challenges, right?
Yeah.
Like you would if you were a sports coach and you were having kids do a tackling drill for 10 minutes in
Yeah.
football, then you were having them do this drill and that drill and this drill. You can do that in every industry. And it's, again, an underrated example about how to learn most efficiently. And when it comes to big dreams, or the big, hairy, audacious goals, as some people put it, these big ideas, I think one of the most important things to give people a tool for is to dream in levels. So to have that massive,
Yeah.
massive dream where it's like, and I like to give some likelihood, because people will ask, well, what do you mean? And I'll say, well, the big dream is like, overtaking the Rock
Yep.
in terms of social media
Right.
followers and maybe, money made in the movies. And so like it's massive. Is it remotely somewhat possible?
Hmm.
Sure. But like, we're talking far fetched. And then on the bottom level, you have like a habit that you could establish tomorrow. There's
Yep.
no reason you can't wake up and do 5 minutes of, reading scripts
Yep.
every day
Yep.
or whatever your passion is. And so dreaming in sort of these levels from, 0% unlikely,
Yep.
25, 50, 75, and
Yeah.
100.
Okay.
And it allows people to pursue those things where, yeah, so maybe that second level is like, I'm going to be in a Netflix feature. And
Yep.
it's like, well, if you set your mind to that, that's going to happen. I don't, as long as you just continue to pursue your
Yep.
dream, that will happen. So it's a guaranteed one, but is it 5 years, 10 years, 25 years? We don't know.
Yeah.
Um, so dreaming in levels, I think, is really important. The other thing too that I don't think I've mentioned in this talk, anyways, is the idea of when you're being vulnerable, it's so important to have somebody that you can connect with when you're going through struggles or when you're facing tough times. Because, like you said with the drumming thing, yeah, it sounds super simple, A, B, C,
Yeah.
D, put yourself out there and do it. But you need to be equipped to deal with the emotions that come with
Yeah.
putting yourself out there. And it's not easy. So having people that you trust, that you can lean on in tough times, I think is another very underrated thing. I've mentioned that before on like Twitter and stuff, and people will say,
Yeah.
or just believe in yourself. Who cares what people think? I'm like, yeah, all right,
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Take
No,
that route.
it's a key piece, right? And I think whether you're, some person which has 1 million followers or some person that has 100, in that game of creating and, following dreams and goals, there is going to be always someone that they've relied on when they've said thank you. It's not like they're getting up and saying, no, this was all me. They're usually thinking a parent, they're thinking a friend, they're thinking whoever it is, or someone that they looked up to, or someone that they lent on. And it's super key because I've had conversations with you, but plenty of other friends, close mates, where we just have check-ins, and I'm venting about this or complaining about that, or the numbers are showing me this and it just doesn't look right, or I'm feeling demotivated. And a lot of the time they then tell me exactly all the stuff I already know, but hearing it from someone else, it puts you back into that playing, gets you back out there, gets you back out on the field, the pat on the back. You've had the chance to have some of the oranges at halftime, and you've refueled and you're good to go. And it's not that I didn't have the answer. It's just that I just needed some, just to be, pushed back into place. And that's super important, especially on the side when it does come to being open to other people, like vulnerable, because the internet and the world, it's not a necessarily a nice place, right? It's wild, and people are rough and tough. And to get all that, I guess real-time feedback, which might not always be positive, really quickly and rapid, it's painful. It's painful.
Yeah, it certainly can be. It's one of the main reasons why, um, when I slip into those moments of regret, because we all do it, short of being like the Buddha or Dalai Lama or something, like we all have these moments, and I'm pretty powerful when it comes to having a solid mindset. But, in these moments of regret about like, oh, I wish I had done this sooner
Yeah.
type thinking, I always come back to that about this, the universe and things are happening for us, not to us. And what are sort of those silver lining playbook moments for me? And for me, I think it's absolutely that I don't know that I would be equipped to deal with all those things,
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago. Whereas right now, like I said, I could start singing and post it to Instagram and be like, oh, that's shit, but here it is. And then day two and day three and day four and just keep going. And I also don't care if, and never look to see if I had, 92 likes or 16
Yeah.
likes or whatever. I just continue to create because I've decided that this is the creative that I want to put out there, that I want to be giving to others to consume, because I know that it will help some people once they find it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I need to continue to put out there, regardless of the results.
Yeah. 100%. No, you've summarized it really, really well. And I think I know a lot of this does sound a lot more easier said than done, but at the end of the day, it really does come down to the simple point of taking action and doing and having the guidance along the way. It's really the only, sure way to get to anywhere we want to do, right? Even if you want to go get milk from the shops, well, you got to go drive down there. You got to go walk down there. The milk's not going to come to you, right? So, yeah, it's an interesting perspective, and very, very anxious of time. And I know we could dive into this for so long. So one thing I wanted to just quickly clarify with you then is, so, with everything that you've been saying, you're talking dreams, you're talking goals and helping other people. So what's really your focus at the moment? I guess whether it's, for the rest of 2021 or short term, but is there a current thing that you're really trying to focus on, whether it is, the side gig, whether it is maybe mental health, maybe it can be anything, but is there anything that you're really prioritizing for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I think at the root of all of it is mental health. You mentioned that as a possible example. Um, Less so for myself at this point because I'm a survivor very much so of acute anxiety and depression through my teen years and early
Yep.
20s. And underlying any of the work that I do is to try and improve that as much as possible for other people.
Yeah.
And I'm such a big believer that when you are in alignment, pursuing your passions, and you feel safe doing so, again, I can't stress that
Yep.
enough because that comes down to having people, and it can be people you hardly know. Like the internet can be a positive place, right?
Yep.
You can reach out to me, like, or yourself, or other people who
100%.
you know are just good people out there through and through, and lean on them. It doesn't need to be, and oftentimes it probably shouldn't be the people in your nearest circle because they're going
Yeah.
to be your big doubters and haters. Um, but really trying to help people figure out and get clarity what that is. Now, how to do that is what is interesting because the internet is as busy and cluttered a place as ever.
Hmm.
So I've been working on a new YouTube series that is essentially like if you took a course called How to Own Your Big Dreams,
Yep.
and it was in like 25 modules with workbooks and that kind of thing. And we charged you $999 to
Yep.
take it. It's that, but I'm just going to publish it to YouTube, right? And
Yep.
so it has a 50-page ebook that goes along with it for free, but maybe 0 people will find it, or I'm sure at least 10 will.
Yep.
But it's just for me this constant um, pursuit of what are the best ways to establish that. My why has always been the same: to help
Yep.
people own their dreams by pragmatically understanding how to pursue their passions. That's been the same for 20 years. It'll never change in the next 20 years, and that's
Okay.
refreshing, although it's scary because Simon Sinek's book Start With Why was like, oh, such a genius book. I'm like, mine's been the same forever. It's
Yep.
going to be the same forever. It's the how
Yep.
that's difficult. And I think it just comes down to relinquishing control. But interestingly, this gets into financial talk, right? And back to what we were talking about with regret. For me, I know deep down that I'm happy that
Yep.
I didn't have a handout. I couldn't get money from a grandparent or
Yep.
something, or I didn't get into Bitcoin early and have this opportunity to have this, couple $1 million to chill and figure this all out. I'm in the dirt, grinding it out,
That's
trying to
it.
figure it out without becoming one of the snake oil salesmen that I see so often DMing me,
Yep.
take this course or that course, and just being willing to continue giving and knowing and trusting that eventually, financially, it
Yep.
will work out if I
Yeah.
stick with it.
And
So
that's
yeah,
backed
I
up.
guess that's what it is.
Yeah, and that's backed up with you doing the work because we can see the work and the work is happening. It'd be different if you're not doing action and it's just expecting things to just play out, because
Yeah,
that's a
just
false reality, right? And that's true. You said it. You're in the trenches. You're grinding. You're in the dirt, and that's. I'm excited to see what happens, and what you said. That you are working on that YouTube series. So super excited for that. Now, before we wrap up, and like I said, we could touch on so much in this, but one thing I like to do is just a quick little rapid fire question. And some of these you've probably already covered, so I'm going to only do a number of them, and the idea is to try and answer them as quick as possible, because I know otherwise we'll get dug into going through them for quite a while. But the first one being is what is your favorite book you have read? Which is a hard one because I know you read a lot.
Yeah, I would go with Man's Search for Meaning, but that
Okay.
was a hard one.
For me, nice one. And okay, and that's good. So, what is one thing? And there's probably more, of course, but one struggle or weakness and one strength.
Struggle or weakness for sure is tied into um, having so many ideas and going in so many different directions and not being able to I don't want to say not succeed,
Yep.
but but starting things and see it's hard because starting things and not finishing them for sure is much more of a strength than I used to think it was. Like the art of quitting and all of that is
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
important.
Knowing when to cut
um,
losses. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And just moving on from sunken costs and being like, no, that wasn't the right thing, I'm pivoting, and that's the advice I would give someone else. But definitely making sure that I map towards my ambition based
Mm,
on the way that I'm spending my time once I have figured out what is the most important thing, and just being efficient with my time instead of going into idea mode would be something that I constantly have to fight and battle.
right.
People throw around the term ADHD.
Yep.
It's that in terms of what people are often talking
Right.
about, just bouncing all over the place and not being able to get things done. Strength, I think, is unrivaled compassion and patience. And I won't even say empathy, because I think the majority of situations and times we say empathy, we can't actually have empathy, right? We have to be willing to say that we don't understand, but
Yep.
I'm here with you and I appreciate what you've gone through and I'm willing to be patient. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that would have to definitely be one of your strengths, especially with the type of work you do. It would be, if you didn't have that, it would be a tough gig. I really think it would be, because I don't think no one could just go do what you do and work with, the people and the situations they've gone through, because that can be very overwhelming. So a big kudos to you. And I know you said you're not a hero, but that is one of those things where it takes a certain type of person to be able to do it, because you would agree, not everyone could just walk off the street and be able to go do that. Because I mean, it is overwhelming. So kudos, dude. Kudos.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. As I mentioned earlier, for me, I wouldn't have it any other way. I've never known anything different. Yeah, it's just in the same way, nobody could really do me
Yeah.
harm,
Well.
right? Which
Yeah,
is kind of
yeah,
like, it's just, yeah, I don't know. It's nice to not have to like think of how to feel that way. It's just,
yeah.
I don't know. I've just been like that since I can remember.
No,
So
that's really good. The next one, which is it's a funny question, is what's your biggest lesson learned?
yeah, that's a big one. Yeah, I think appreciating that there is a really fine line between the life is too short and it's really not type thing. Um, you know, uh, Short of extending the conversation too long for you, I grew up in a funeral home
Yeah,
and learned a lot of things very young. I lost my brother suddenly this past year.
yeah,
So many students, we've lost three to drugs or gun violence of students that have had in the past year. I know very front and center that life is short. However, I also know that when we live in the present moment, as we talked about earlier, that life can go by very slowly and you can really enjoy it while you're here.
yeah. No, that's a really good answer. The next one then is, how do you spend your free time? As short as possible, because I don't. You'll
Golf,
probably go into learning things.
golf.
Golf, nice, nice. Favorite quote?
Brick walls are here for a reason.
Hmm. Who's that by?
Randy Posh, the last lecture.
Okay, okay. Well, man, dude, it's been such a great honor having you on here. And I mean, we've gone into so much, and I know you and I have discussed a lot of these things prior to this on Clubhouse and just in our own little chit chats. But there's a lot of gems here, a lot of deepness here as well. And I would encourage anyone listening to, if they haven't already, to jump over and see what you're all about, because, this is just the tip of the iceberg. You are doing a lot of amazing things. And even the stuff that you're dealing with on a daily basis is enriching, because you're able to learn and experience from their own experience, right? And I think that's something which, as I said earlier, is not easy to be able to, because it would be quite overwhelming. But to take that and then you're also creating something which is inspiring other people on a broader scale. So it's really exciting to have this chat with you and to see everything that you're doing. I wanted to give you the chance to kind of, if there was one thing that you wanted to leave with the listeners or the audience, what would that be?
Well, I'll quickly finish the Randy Pausch quote and say that it's brick walls are there for a reason, to let us know if you want something bad enough, and to keep those who don't want it bad enough out. That's the full version of the quote. Yeah, the last lecture is a really, really cool book and YouTube video. Maybe that's all I need to leave people with.
Yeah, that's fine by me.
I think the hashtag we use, just keep learning, is a fun one, and it's a great kind of like cap off point at the end of the podcast. I say, remember, just keep learning.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what we'll love to do. We don't know if something will be successful or unsuccessful. Even relationships, right? Like some end up in divorce, some don't, but just continue to take that learning stance, and throughout it all, you'll be able to live with vitality.
Great advice. And where's the best place for people? And of course, all this will be in the show notes, but where's the best place for people to find you, see the latest things that you're doing? Where would you advise them to go as your first place?
I think social media, and my handles everywhere is at Just Tries. It's been cool to be able to have the same thing consistently across them, like The Rock. So at Just Tries on any social platform.
Nice.
Yeah, and following the podcast, the Learned Podcast, justkeeplearning.ca is the website, and appreciate anyone and everyone who's around. Appreciate you for having this conversation and welcome me on the show.
Dude, it's been a huge honor. Really do appreciate you taking the time. I know it's late there in Canada, and I super encourage anyone that has taken any little nugget or piece of value or curiosity from this to reach out to Justin. Have a chat with him. I know his DMs are always open. He is a busy man though. And also, if you've got questions about this, reach out to myself. And I think one good thing that you said was, we're always happy to have a chat, right? Everyone's going through a lot of things, and always happy to, to give that extra piece of advice or just to listen, or whatever it may be. So, but Justin, really do appreciate you being here, mate. It's been super great. And I hope you have rest of the evening is really good for you.
Thank you. Won't be the last time. Appreciate you.
Cheers, mate. Well, there you go, folks. What an absolute awesome episode. And Justin, once again, just want to say a huge thank you for coming on to the show. Look, I'm so encouraged and inspired by people like yourself, because you're so humble, and you're reaching out to help others, and all the stories that you've shared with me today in the episode, but also outside of the podcast, they're always very encouraging, and you always bring such fresh perspective. And I really hope you, as a listener, as you've listened to myself and Justin talk about the things we have, that there's something there that has encouraged you, something there that has inspired you. And I encourage you to, if there's more that you want to know, reach out to Justin, have the conversation. He's more than happy to have that conversation with you. Of course, you can reach out to myself as well. But what I really loved about this conversation is just how there is always more to something that we don't always see. And one thing that I love about Justin so much is that he brings perspective, he brings different ways of thinking, and also his approach to learning. That was one of the favorite parts of this conversation is, can we be learning in a different way, or can, with the right motivation, go out and achieve these things a lot quicker than what people have achieved over 20, 30 years. So some interesting things here. I've been inspired. I hope you've been inspired. But of course, I really do appreciate you being here. My name's Chris Furlong. I am the host of the Further Your Lifestyle podcast, and it's been an absolute pleasure bringing this conversation to you. Really do appreciate you being here. And yeah, have a wonderful day.